Novo Nordisk, the company behind Wegovy and Ozempic. These are the diabetes and weight management medications that have taken the world by storm. And this company has been through a wild ride in the last couple of months.
Meanwhile, the ongoing shortage in obesity and diabetes drugs is giving rise to another kind of problem. Patients are looking for other ways to get the medication. Some have turned to med spas and telehealth providers, which use special compounding pharmacies to make their own formulations.
But it's been hard for the Danish pharmaceutical to keep its leadership.
It will cut 9,000 jobs, or more than 11% of its workforce.
They've disappointed the stock markets because they've underperformed on expectations. They've fired and replaced the CEO, and now they're firing 9,000 people globally. Is this a story of crash and burn or something else? Is it the end of Novo Nordisk as we know it? Quite possibly, yes. Is it necessary that it has to be that way? Well, that depends. I'm Mike. I've got a background in tech, pharma, and consulting. I've held C-level roles in international companies, and I have degrees in business, human resources, and psychology. On this channel, I analyze and pick apart why companies do the things they do. And this time around, I'm talking about Novo Nordisk. I've worked there. I've still got close connections there. And this is my perspective on what's really up and down in this whole Novo Nordisk story. Let's get stuck in. Novo Nordisk is a company that's been around since 1923. It was started as a company focused on insulin production. At the time, diabetes was a disease that significantly reduced life expectancy. Still does today, essentially. Throughout the last century, they launched new products and slowly grew on the world stage as a front-of-the-pack producer of diabetes-related medications. In 1989, they were merged with Nordisk Gentofte and became Novo Nordisk as we know them more or less today. The first thing to be mindful of is that Novo Nordisk, in simplified terms, have largely been a one-trick pony throughout their existence. Diabetes as a treatment area has for the largest time been far the dominant product category for them. In 2000, diabetes care made up 70% of their revenue. Their three other areas of business were coagulation disorders, growth hormone, and hormone replacement therapy. In total, their revenue at the time, in US dollars, was about $3 billion. At the time, Pfizer had a revenue of $31 billion, making them 10 times larger than Novo Nordisk. Eli Lilly, who also had a presence in the diabetes space, had a revenue of $10 billion in 2000, making them 3 times larger than Novo Nordisk. Basically, Novo Nordisk was a small and even insignificant pharma player globally in 2000. They had a niche, and this niche was profitable, but also protected. At the time, the rule of thumb in pharma was that pharma companies did not invest in something unless it was a billion-dollar business. Back in the year 2000, diabetes wasn't a big thing, so Novo Nordisk didn't have the stiffest of competition. And concerns at the time were more about being bought by a bigger player, something that was made difficult by their holding and stock structure, but competition as such was actually quite limited. And you have to keep this in mind because it's going to be important later. Hopefully you're enjoying this content. If you are, please consider subscribing so you can follow my channel and be updated whenever I come out with a new video. Thanks a ton. The other thing to know is the Novo Nordisk way, or the Novo Nordisk way of management. Until 2000, the company was headed by Mads Øvlesen, who pioneered the Novo Nordisk way of management, which at its core was a set of values and leadership principles that to this day define how Novo runs their business. Lars Rebien Sørensen became CEO in the early 2000s and continued these values until Lars Fruergaard took over. He too was a man that was respected as a product of those Novo Nordisk values. Today, the values are: create value by having a patient-centered business approach, set ambitious goals and be empowered to achieve them, hold ourselves accountable for our financial, environmental, and social performance, remain curious and innovate for the benefit of patients and society at large, build and maintain good relations with our stakeholders, value inclusiveness and diversity and treat everyone with respect, focus on performance and personal development, foster a healthy and engaging working environment, strive for agility and simplicity in everything we do. Finally, choose to never compromise on quality and ethics. What I'm about to say is also important for later, so really pay attention. Those values were conservative. They were careful. They are filled with empathy. They espouse good leadership. They espouse care and respect for the patient. They prioritize quality and ethics and morals. And this might be hard for an American corporate employee to understand, but this is a company that actually meant it. Most importantly, above everything else, The company has been uncompromising, and these values are incredibly idealistic. Novo Nordisk set a massively high bar for themselves in terms of leadership, decision-making, and compliance. Never compromise on quality and ethics. It meant that compliance to FDA rules were not a gray area. GXP is an almost religious chant throughout the organization. Novo Nordisk saw it as a competitive and strategic advantage to be essentially over-compliant to, among others, FDA regulations. Where most of the pharmaceutical industry is known for making business trade-offs on risk in terms of complying with different regulations and ethical standards, Novo has always stayed very much, relatively speaking, on the straight and narrow. It's only fairly recently that Novo Nordisk dropped their ambition of actively searching for a cure for diabetes to a more modest goal of, if somebody's going to find a cure, it might as well be us. If you meet Novo Nordisk people, especially in Denmark, there's an innate sense of pride about their company. There's a true belief that this is a pharmaceutical company like no other. This is where employees are cared for and patients in the need of their medicine are just as cared for. There's also a feeling that it's not just about the money. Most Novo employees will also speak of how, despite not having the highest salaries in the industry, they would work nowhere else because of how they are treated as employees. Engagement is usually through the roof. It's hard to believe for outsiders, but this, to many Novo acolytes, is what makes Novo Nordisk different from every other pharmaceutical company in the world. This incredibly powerful, values-driven culture and their niche strength in diabetes care has served them unbelievably. But things started to change in the 2000s and onwards. Specifically, two things changed. First is the increase in obesity globally, but especially in the US, that has led to a massive demand upswing in the need for diabetes treatment. Second, the release of Wegovy and Ozempic, which was a diabetes treatment product and essentially the same product but slightly reformulated to target appetite regulation and therefore function as a weight loss drug. From 2000 to 2009, revenue increased from those $3.5-ish billion to just under $10 billion. That's a compound annual growth of around 11% per year. From 2009 to 2020, they increased to $18.7 billion per year, marking an average CAGR of 7.4% for the period. From 2020 to 2025, they went up to $42 billion, marking a more than 17% average CAGR for the period. Wegovy was released in 2021, and it's clear that this was the game changer for Novo Nordisk. More overweight people globally, and especially in the US, had been a growth engine for 20 years at a rate of about 7 to 10% for 2 decades. And then, in the span of 5 years, because essentially of one product in 2 versions, that growth rate shot up to 17%. And today, diabetes and now obesity care still makes up more than 85% of Novo Nordisk's revenue. Novo Nordisk is still largely a one-trick pony with no broad pipeline of other products that contribute meaningfully to their revenue and their bottom line. During this period, though, the growth was staggering, and as a result, Novo had to hire a lot of people, going from 53,000 people in 2020 to 78,000 today. And their stock skyrocketed. And at one point, they were valued as the most valuable company in all of Europe. Compared to 25 years before, they were now 2/3 the size of Pfizer, who had completely eclipsed them in terms of size and revenue 25 years earlier. But there were problems.
It is often sold to people as a quick fix to lose weight. Injectable drugs known as GLP-1s. You likely know them as Ozempic, Wegovy, or Zepbound. But in the last couple of years, people have gotten a hold of compounded versions without going to their doctor, instead often visiting places like med spas or weight loss clinics. News 5 Investigates found, despite a change by the FDA limiting how these drugs can be produced, months later, they're still easy to find here at home.
And at the heart of the problem, Novo Nordisk could not live up to market expectations. This was a company that had essentially a niche to itself. They had a groundbreaking product, and they could not keep up with demand. It was so bad that stories of people buying and selling Ozempic and Wegovy on the black market were an actual thing.
Hi, and welcome to another edition of Your Health with Dr. Christie. My name is Dr. Christy Reisinger, and today I'd like to talk to y'all about compounded semaglutide and why I'm comfortable prescribing this medication.
Doctors would prescribe the diabetes medication to obesity patients that were willing to pay, and for a period, people in need of diabetes medication in the US could not get it because the limited supply was being routed to people wanting to lose weight. As a result, the FDA allowed off-brand and non-labeled versions of Wegovy to be sold to alleviate the imbalance between supply and demand. At the same time, a lot of other companies scrambled to get their own version of the drug to the market to get a share of this super lucrative market. This essentially meant that Novo Nordisk had two problems at once that they had never before had to deal with. One, they were not used to growing at this kind of pace. They had never tried it before. And two, they were not used to having this level of stiff competition. They were largely used to being, relatively speaking, small fry in a relatively protected space where there was a high level of trust and confidence in their products. So Novo Nordisk went to the markets and adjusted their outlook. The shares crashed, the CEO got fired, and they brought the new guy on board. And this is where Mike becomes CEO. Mike was head of operations before, and he's done what you've seen before.
But let's be honest about where we are. The competitive landscape has completely changed. 2 years ago, we were alone. Now everyone wants to play in obesity and diabetes. This means we need to move faster, focus harder on what we do best, be more precise about where we invest. People who know me will tell you that I love speed, that I'm direct, and I love to win.
On the outside, he's announced a plan to fire 15% of the global workforce. He's announced a leaner, meaner, more customer-centric organization with more urgency, more dynamism, more action. Basically, less talk, more action. Basically, it's the same CEO jargon you hear from the new Intel guy, the new Starbucks guy, Elon Musk, and a host of others. On the surface, it's not particularly groundbreaking communication. It's actually a bit of a trope at this point. The hardcore, cleaner upper CEO. The stock markets have reacted as they usually do. They have let the stocks increase in the promise of reduced costs. Reducing by 9,000 people is going to save them somewhere between $1 billion and $1.5 billion a year. Not that they're really in need of cost savings. Novo Nordisk has an EBIT of over 40%. This is a highly profitable sector and a highly profitable company. Those 1.5 billion will add a few percentage points, but Novo is far from going out of business anytime soon. The biggest question, the question that has to be answered above all others is there anything fundamentally wrong with Novo Nordisk? And I'd argue, no. Mike, the new CEO, believes yes. And of course, the board does as well. And the context of my answer is they've grown 17%. More than 10% a year for over 25 years. They are largely delivering on demand now for their products, and they are incredibly profitable. But because they're a publicly traded company, the markets have different expectations, and they express their disappointment when they aren't met. This isn't a company that is doing badly. 10% growth on average for 25 years in a row. It's not too bad. By any other measure, most people would see this as a success story, but the markets don't see it that way. Fundamentally, this entire situation has pointed a light on one thing that you can choose to see as a strength or a weakness. And the board and Mike, I believe, see it as a clear weakness. The problem is the Novo Nordisk way. Those idealistic values that 3 CEOs over the span of 3 decades have espoused are essentially what Mr. Mike sees as the problem. And depending on the perspective, he's maybe not wrong. Create value by having a patient-centered business approach, set ambitious goals and empower people to achieve them, hold ourselves accountable, remain curious and innovate for the benefits of the patients and society at large, build and maintain good relations with our stakeholders, value inclusiveness and diversity and treat everyone with respect, focus on performance and personal development, foster a healthy and engaging working environment, strive for agility and simplicity in everything that we do, and choose to never compromise on quality and ethics. Those values. Are there downsides to those values? Absolutely. Let's just take a few. Never compromise on quality and ethics. Take that value to its extreme conclusion. What do you get? You get extreme compliance. You get risk aversion. You get bureaucracy built to avoid mistakes, avoid risks, avoid exposure. It's the literal opposite of Facebook's move fast and break things. At the extreme end, it fosters a culture where the compliant and the careful are rewarded. The risk takers and the idea generators are shunned. Also, build and maintain good relations with our stakeholders. This one applies both internally and externally. It's an excellent value. But again, take it to the extreme conclusion. Don't rock the boat. Be political. Don't burn bridges. Make your counterparts in other departments look good and never, ever make them look bad because they will burn you. It's a value that in its worst state fosters office politics and cronyism. Most people that leave Novo speak really highly of it, but there are voices that have had bad things to say. There's agreement in a lot of circles that Novo is hyper-political, where stepping on the wrong people's toes will kill your career. It's an incredibly slow-moving organization. Novo would call themselves deliberate. Some things are just over-engineered, and the ability to act rapidly and aggressively is not one I would associate with Novo. I spoke to a friend and senior partner at a consulting firm, who obviously would prefer to be unnamed, that has recurring business with Novo Nordisk. And although this person speaks with respect, they are also clear. Novo has been very comfortable and very dominant for a long time. And it means that as an organization, it has a dull edge. And you have to remember that their key problems right now are that they have inadvertently opened the door to competition to a degree that they've never been exposed to before. And there's a question if they have a unique enough product to maintain a dominant role in the space going forward when more and more competitors are eating market share. When you have a market largely to yourself with no real competition, you can afford to be ethical and friendly and nice and maybe a little bit slow moving when it comes to closing the sales. You don't need to be as aggressive on marketing. The customer essentially comes to you and you can maintain a holier than thou moral type of high ground. You can also slowly expand your factories. You can take your time. You can follow all the rules to perfection and not just to a T, but you can cross the T twice and you can dot the I twice. And you can have those T's and I's checked and double checked just to be on the safe side. The fact is, Novo was and still is not a fast-moving organization. It wasn't when I was there, and it isn't now. It's slow, it's methodical, it's bureaucratic, it's got committees, it over-engineers things, it delays hard decisions, it tables things that could be risky, and it prioritizes the polite, positive leadership and culture that they are known for in Denmark and globally. But I repeat, it's easy being the teacher's pet when competition is low and things are relatively speaking easy. But right now, that's not the case. They have stiffer competition than they've ever had before, and they are at a real risk of squandering their dominant position in a massively lucrative segment. And it's not just that they're at risk of going out of business, not at all, but they risk not being dominant and just being another player in a highly competitive sea of players. Consider this. In 25 years, Novo has not succeeded in meaningfully developing any new treatment areas. Their areas of hemophilia, growth hormone, and the rest are small. They are insignificant even, both internally and in terms of market potential. Their highly touted R&D organization has, to put it very bluntly, just succeeded in 25 years in making slightly better ways of treating diabetes. Other business areas don't have a meaningful commercial size. In part, that's by choice, but it's very much also a consequence of not a particularly strong innovation culture. Again, it's slow, it's methodical, it's bureaucratic, it's safe. And the fact is, 99% of all R&D doesn't go anywhere. That's kind of the whole point of R&D in pharma, is to basically fail and fail and fail and only let the very best things through. But even there, not many things have gotten through. I've got no doubt that some of those factories that they built were inspected brick by brick for compliance. No corners were cut, or very few at least, because that's not how Novo does things. And this approach, which has a ton of strengths, is what hampered Novo's growth. So CEO Mike has fired people. That's probably not really going to change a lot. But at the core, as he has understood it, the core problem of Novo, the problem is to strip away the bureaucracy that is entrenched in the Novo Nordisk way, to strip away the layers, to strip away the politics and the cronyism and the protectionism and the defensiveness that does also permeate parts of the organization. He's going to need to look at the organizational structures and simplify the reporting line, which apparently it looks like he is doing. But he's also going to need to have a long, hard conversation about stripping away layers of overcompliance, cutting back on entrenched morals and ethics that slow down decision-making and action throughout the organization. Committees, decision forums, everywhere where there are roadblocks to momentum, he would need to remove them. And he also culturally will have to make Novo Nordisk a commercially far more aggressive organization that fights for market share and is willing to play dirty, just like everybody else, essentially. And probably, my guess at least, he'll take a sledgehammer to a highly respectful and employee-centric leadership that is at the heart of some of those values. Employee development, healthy and engaging working environment. I'd wager that if you catch Mike off the record, he'd say those Novo employees are too comfortable, have it too easy, and are too complacent with not high enough expectations being demanded. Those things I mentioned in the beginning, the safe market made it possible for Novo to have a high moral and ethical high ground. But now, values are easy to have when you're doing well and can afford them. But when things go awry, those values come under a whole different level of pressure. What was seen as a strength becomes seen as the source of weakness, and Mike is the man who has ushered in a time of reckoning with those values that most Novo employees hold very dear. My personal position is I would probably hate what Mike is up to. For me, I grew up with the Novo way. I drank the Kool-Aid, and much like a lot of Danes, Novo Nordisk was and is a beacon of good leadership through and through. The attempt to take some level of moral high ground in an industry where moral high grounds generally aren't seen to be something companies aspire to was something I and a lot of people found incredibly appealing. But it's easy being righteous when you have it easy. It's kind of the story of Western countries lecturing developing nations on the ills of fossil fuels. I mean, sure, you can lecture now where your industry is built and you're using us as your landfill, but we are not allowed to use fossil fuels? If Mike has come to the conclusion that the culture of Novo is the problem, which it is if your goal is to appease the markets, then he's in for a tough ride because he has to change the heart of Novo. Long-time employees are going to hate him. He's going to be seen as cynical, but the board will see him as vitalizing an organization that has become entrenched in values that are now a ball and chain, slowing their growth. Long-time employees will be screaming, "This is not how Novo does things." They will shout from the rooftops that this is not the Novo that Mads Øvlesen championed. The Novo way is dead, is what they're going to scream. And I'd probably be screaming the exact same thing. But if your goal is to give the markets what they want, then that is what has to happen. Because there is some truth to it. Novo has never been a fast mover. Novo has never been great at being hyper-aggressive. They've had it good, and it served them well. But in a world where only 17% growth is seen as a failure, the money men decided to put someone in to not take a torch to those values, then at least reshape them. The almost pious former Novo Nordisk will have to die if they are to live up to those market expectations. If Mike succeeds, Novo will just be one more pharmaceutical company. Profitable, strong, but it won't ever be Novo. Those are my thoughts. Share yours in the comments. Remember to subscribe. Cheers.